Hey Diana, did you know your law firm might be worth just nothing?
Mark, wait, what?
Ladies and gentlemen, jurists and just curious, welcome to the Successful Barrister podcast. Here you'll learn about marketing, management, and life skills for lawyers that probably won't get you disbarred. Hosted by Marc Whitehead, a seasoned lawyer who remembers when fax machines were cutting edge, and Diana Berry, attorney, COO, and the brains behind the scenes. Together, they are the legal world's most dynamic duo since statutes met regulations. So if you're looking to build a practice, not a prison, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful Barrister, where legal legends are made.
And welcome to the Successful Barrister podcast, the podcast for lawyers and law firm leaders about marketing management and life skills that probably won't get you disbarred. I am your host, Marc Whitehead, alongside my number one, my COO, Diana Berry. Hey, Diana, what's going on?
Oh, not much, Mark. I'm not sure. I know how you feel about this new setup, but um,
So we for the listener out there, we are experimenting. Normally, all of our podcasts, we're in the same room, staring straight across at each other across a little 4-foot table. And today, we are actually doing a remote setup. So we're both talking to a computer screen. So this is just a new experience for us. I'm not sure that I like it.
yeah,
Um,
my
one
my headset's kind of an interesting idea here, but
Yeah, you have the
we're gonna roll
headset
with it.
going on. I've eschewed the headset and just am talking into my computer, and hopefully the audio is good. We'll see how that works out. I did notice one interesting fact. When we're live together, we have two cameras, one on you, one on me. And of course, we aren't thinking about it that we're being on camera. But here on the computer, we can see ourselves. And I noticed you started primping your hair. Like you saw your hair and you've been primping your hair for like the last 5 minutes. See,
Well,
so I can
for
already see this format is changing the vibe.
Right. For all the listeners that don't know me personally, or us personally, we are in Houston, Texas, and it is August. When we are recording this, it's August in Houston, Texas. So it's just all the 100% humidity, more or less. And then secondly, for those who don't know me, I hate the sound of my voice. And now I'm looking at myself and listening to myself. And this is just not, I'm definitely out of my comfort zone here, Mark.
Oh my God. Just as a pure HR violation, Diana, you are a beautiful young woman
Ah,
and you are very photogenic and you look great.
well, thank
I'm
you,
the
sir.
old curmudgeon fart that I'm sitting here looking at.
Well, you're too kind, Mark. Does that mean that you're going to be really harsh on my outline for today's podcast?
Absolutely. So Diana, what are we
Uh,
talking about today?
Succession planning. I've actually been trying to get
Oh,
you to talk more about this in person. And then so I think I was thinking about this podcast outline when I was getting it together. I'm like, did I just subconsciously make this a podcast outline so we would have to talk about it?
it absolutely is because she knows that I keep ducking the subject
Yeah.
and
Because I think most law firm owners do. And it's not,
right. And so the only way you can get me to talk about it is to make it into a podcast. So this
that is
sounds like
correct.
another therapy session, is what this is going to sound like.
Well, hopefully it'll leave with some action items. And so we're going to, I think, close out our podcast this time with some action items from you. So let's just see if I can convince you. And through this podcast, maybe we can see what action items you have at the end of it.
Okay. So this will be a new segment for us since we are changing things up just a wee bit. We passed the year mark now. We're in the second year of this podcast.
We're all grown up.
I know we're all grown up now. So uh, what's our feature? What's our feature that we're developing for our last segment of the podcast?
Mark's five action items.
Oh yeah, Mark's five action items. So
Mhm.
at the end of every podcast, Mark will summarize with Mark's five action items. Although I will occasionally defer and we'll change it up to Diana's five action items when
And I'm sure you
I
won't tell me
fit.
before we start recording.
I will generally just spring it on you last minute and then we'll just wing it from there because that's how we've done this entire podcast for the entire year. We just wing it.
Well, and that's kind of odd that you mentioned that because it's a perfect segue into how I think many of our listeners may find themselves in this current position, right? They went to law school, they wanted to be lawyers, and then they found themselves what we've called before in the podcast, accidental law firm owners. And they are making probably great money, or at least more money than they thought they could when they set out their own shingle. But just because you're making money, I don't think that you've really created an asset or one that really sets you and your family up for success after maybe the inevitable happens for all of us. And so today we're going to talk about succession
We
planning.
That's great. We all have expiration dates, every one of us out there. So,
Yep.
as I tell people all the time, there is going to be a day that comes when you no longer come to this office. Everybody at some point is going to depart from their employ at Marc Whitehead and Associates. Hopefully, it's in a good way, a great retirement or a new opportunity, but eventually all of us will be doing something else. And eventually this law firm will be owned by someone else in some form or fashion. So these are just realities that we have to deal with, of which, I've been ducking. I get it. I duck.
Well, and we hope that it's on your terms, right? We hope that the exit is something where you can control. But what if it's not? I don't think, and I should back up a minute and say that this idea came to us really, because we did talk about it before I created the outline. And, we've heard two somewhat similar but different presentations at two summits, the prior two summits, about succession planning and
The
about.
Atticus summits you're referring to.
Oh, yes, sir. I
You
apologize.
got to pimp
I
out
wasn't
Atticus.
clear.
Pimping
Yes,
out
Brian, I
Atticus.
wasn't clear there. Attica summits. And we talk about succession planning in some form or another. And so, one of the things that one of the presenters that we heard, and I forget which one, so I'm not going to attribute it because I might mess up, but he said, dying at your death isn't noble. Like, that's not either desired or beneficial for your successors or your employees.
Yet
So,
that's what most lawyers plan on doing, especially the smaller firm lawyers. They plan on dying at their desk. So,
well, and so I think today we're going to tackle the question about what happens when you either don't want to or can't do this anymore, right? When you can't come into the office or don't want to. Mister, I'm going to live into 125. Did we land at 125?
125 is aspirational. A more realistic goal is like 110.
All right, let's use 110 for today's
110.
podcast.
We'll go 110.
So I think the first point that we want to make, right, Mark, is the myth of value. Right?
Right. So, I know I've used this illustration before in this podcast, but it was probably 20 episodes ago and nobody remembers. But I was at the Atticus Summit last year, and this lawyer and I were talking, and she was talking about wanting to sell her practice, at least in the next few years. And I'm like, great. Well, how many employees you got? Oh, none. It's just me. Oh, and then she was 65 years old. And I go, okay, how do you get your business? Well, mostly from referrals from other lawyers. Oh, okay. Do you have any recurring revenue? Well, no, I'm an employment lawyer that, the cases come in. And I'm sitting there thinking, what does this person have to sell? I mean, literally, what does she have to sell? She has no systems. She has no processes. She has no marketing machine. She really has no goodwill. She has no client base because her practice is basically all referral based from other lawyers. She really and she's 65.
Yep.
It's not like she has time to fix these things.
Well,
And she
she
has
may.
yeah, well, I mean, but she indicated that she wanted out in 2 or 3 years, which
Then
two or
no.
3 years is nothing.
Yep.
And I'm like, this is like the worst case scenario. This person literally has nothing to sell. I mean, she has probably an obsolete computer and a few sticks of furniture and maybe a phone number that has some goodwill in it. She has nothing to sell.
Well, so
You
the
know,
idea is that just because your financial statements look good, she might have made a lot of money. Like she may be cash flowing. Your everything looks really great. She may even have had employees, but that even if so, all of these things don't mean that our law firm is now worth something.
yeah. The second that she has any health event, her basically her law firm is worth zero.
Yep.
I
And so
mean, the referrals dry up, everything dries up. It's worth zero.
And the second point that I think that we want to make, why succession planning, like I think we're in this intro, we're really just building the case as to why this is so important. And then in the second segment, we'll talk about some of the options that we've learned about through our Atticus training and some other things that we've learned and read. So, but the other point that we want to make about why succession planning is so important, it's because it's really honestly the right thing to do, not only for yourself, but your family and your team.
And your
Marc,
clients.
and your client and your clients. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that, Marc?
Well, I mean, think about it. You have a duty to your clients. And if you're a small firm and you're going to die at your desk, well, guess what? The clients that you have on board the moment you die at your desk are all going to get screwed. Just by definition, they're not going to be in a good way. Um, your family's not going to be in a good way unless you provided for them otherwise, like through life insurance or some other investment strategy, or you built up assets over the year. But your family's going to now be burdened with having to basically shut down your law practice if you
Mm-hmm.
haven't taken care of that. I've seen that many times. I have my mother does probate law, and she's doing that right now. She's having to shut down a lawyer's practice that became unexpectedly disabled and ultimately died from a stroke. Um, so you're going to burden other people by your failure to act and failure to plan. I wanted to switch. So you were mentioning the Atticus Summit. I was going to mention specifically Victor Medina gave a presentation, um, and I'm going to butcher the title, but his basic premise was build a practice to sell.
The build a
Um,
per- no, it was build a perpetual law firm,
build a
or
perpetual
the
law
perpetual
firm,
law firm.
but it was a derivation on a prior um, Atticus program on calling "Build Your Practice to Sell," and the whole idea is this. So this is kind of I give this analogy. Um, I had this sports car once, and it had gotten kind of old and kind of beat up, and I decided to sell it. And I went and cleaned it up, and I detailed it out, and I fixed a few of its flaws, and I was getting ready to sell it. And once I fixed it up and made it ready for sale, I looked at it and go, "This car is freaking awesome. I'm not selling it. I'm keeping it." Same thing, you do this same concept with your practice. If you build a practice that is sellable, that has everything that a buyer would want, once you do that, you might look at it and say, why do I need to sell it? Why don't I keep it and just enjoy the fruits of my labor, um, and enjoy the fruits of my practice working on my behalf? And I think what Victor's concept is build a practice that is ready for sale, that is self-sustaining, that is profitable, that does not require a tremendous amount of your labor, time, and effort, and just sit back and enjoy the profits of it perpetually.
And that's our segment too, guys. So I think that that would probably be a good time to break. But really, guys, before we leave, Marc talked a lot about why it's the right thing for your clients. But obviously, in Texas, probate may not be a big problem for it's not as bad as it is in some other states. But certainly for your families, if you really want to leave them a real asset, then there's structure that needs to be involved with your law firm, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. But also, you just, for yourself. Marc certainly did not know that he wanted to live into 110 when I met him almost 5 years ago. And
I
that's,
didn't have that epiphany until I hit 55. So,
and you were not 55, right? When I don't
no,
know.
I wasn't 55 when you started working for me. I was a couple of years later. But when I turned 55, I had the epiphany that I was halfway done. That meant, therefore, doing the math, that meant I was going to live to 110. So that's
And
where this comes
so
from.
And so, as our great life changes and what we have envisioned for that, I think then we need to all consider, is our lifetime legacy, i.e., this law firm for you, Mark, is that set up to, you know, fulfill your lifestyle, to finance, for lack of a better word, your lifestyle, your family's lifestyle, and of course your health and all the things that come with it. So I think now would be a good time to break, where we're going to, in our next segment, we're going to talk about a few options that law firm owners have for succession planning.
This podcast is sponsored by Marc Whitehead Associates, a national disability benefits law firm. Marc Whitehead runs a firm of over 60 dedicated people whose mission is to make a difference in the lives of our injured and disabled clients. Marc represents disabled claimants in Social Security disability, private disability insurance, and veterans disability claims in all 50 states. Marc Whitehead is double board certified in both Social Security disability law and personal injury trial law. Marc has litigated disability cases in over 40 states and counting, and can help your clients too. Stop throwing your phone calls away. Call Marc Whitehead at 701-VIP-LEAD. That's 701-VIP-LEAD. Or visit our website at disabilitydenials.com. Referral fees are paid in all jurisdictions where it is permitted. Refer us your disability cases today and know that your clients will be in good hands.
And we're back. All right. Before we get started, I have to promote something really quick. So I'm doing a program with Atticus on building your great practice, your great life, on October 3rd here in Houston, Texas. I'm doing it with my good friend, Denise Cullen. We did a program, I think last year in Houston, called Double Your Revenue with Atticus. This is a new program, so it's going to be a different take on it, but it's October 3rd. And if you're interested in learning more about it, shoot me an email at marc@marcwhitehead.com, Marc spelled with a C, or go to atticusadvantage.com and navigate over to programs. And there's a whole list of options. As a matter of fact, we're doing this program around the country. The one in Houston is October 3rd. There are other locations around the country if you want to look and see if there's one more convenient to you. But go to programs at atticusadvantage.com. And that is my commercial for Atticus right now. All right, so we're going to get back to succession planning. And I've already realized I pissed Diana off because I stepped on her outline by jumping the gun.
Well, piss you off is probably a strong word, but it's not too far from
you were scowling. That was a total pissed off look.
I am totally out of my comfort zone here, Mark, with my headset, and we're not in the same room. And so I'm going to come back, and we're going to.
I will give you credit. You haven't primped your hair since we started, so you've gotten past it.
Why, thank you, Mark. But I think that one of the first things that we need to talk about is knowing where you want to end up, right? So before we get into the kind of three models that we wanted to really kind of discuss pros and cons of today, I think it's most important to know where you want to end up. So Mark, you want to be, your goal is to live to 110. I mean, are you going to be one of those that dies in your chair there at 110?
No. I figure I've got 20 years left. So I'm 58. I figure I got 20 years left in the chair. Now, at the end of the 20 years, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to sell my practice.
Yeah.
I might still continue to own the practice. I just, probably am not going to be showing up every day. I'm going to probably, maybe the chairman of the board or something like that, some cool fancy title, but I will have some young whippersnapper like you or somebody, to taking over as a CEO or something like that.
I will not be young in 20 years, sir, but I appreciate you giving me the call
you will.
out. So
you will. You have good genes. You and Sydney Sweeney have great genes. I'm just saying.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And I think it's a perfect segue to our first option that we've come up with, which is basically to promote from within, right? So
yes.
In that 20 years, so we're going to use Marc's 20-year time frame in some of these models to kind of illustrate what we're talking about. So over the next 20 years, basically, you will shift a lot of your day-to-day responsibilities to someone. Is that the theory, Marc?
Well, that would be the theory, yes. So there's two pieces of this. There's one is shifting responsibility to other people. The other, and this is the more open question, is whether you shift some of the ownership, the equity in the firm over to other people. Now, um, we're, I don't know if we're unique. We might be slightly unique in the sense that we're, a singular owner firm. I own 100% of the firm, 100% of the equity in the firm. Whereas many people out there have partners and different partnership agreements and so forth and so forth. So at some point, you know, um, it would be logical to shift the equities, some of the ownership interest in some form or fashion, of which right now we have no plan for, but it makes logical sense. Um, you know, especially if you find key people that you want to be your successors, that you want to stay. Um, Now there is the rule of thumb: you don't give away your equity. You have to the equity is sold in some form or fashion. There's lots of ways to do that. Um, and I think in the third segment, I will give you some of my ideas on how to do that. I'll give you my one good one. Um, but at some point, you may want to have partners and have the partners buy in. Ideally, you might have I'm 58. Ideally, I would want to have people younger than me buying in. That would be the ideal succession plan.
And I think that
That was
that's
my first
really
thought. Hmm?
exactly. And so no, I think that's exactly what you're working towards, because you want them, whoever your successor, your heir apparent's going to be from within, you want them to have an owner's mindset, which is, so that's why they would want to purchase equity into what you have built. And I think one of the obvious benefits of doing this type of structure, this type of succession planning, is that it does preserve your client relationships as well as the culture that you've built. And so this is a really good way for you to still maintain the legacy, what everything that you've built, while still also um, giving a good exit for both your employees as well as your family.
Yeah, well, it's a good way to lock in your key people. If you have key people that you want to keep, um, if they're worth their salt, they're probably going to want some form of equity at some point.
Yeah, and of course, the challenge with this is that it does take time, and you may not have the right people right now that you would be like, well, I just can't see that X person being able to run a law firm, and that's a different challenge. But now Mark has 20 years to think about that, to maybe bring in someone and or get this other person some business classes or something in order to be able to make this option more feasible for him. The second option that we want to talk about is obviously just a straight up merger or an acquisition, or an outright sell. Mark, not obviously on your, that's nothing you're going to ever consider.
Well, no, I can't imagine that would happen. But it could happen. A good friend of mine, Jen Gore. I don't know if you know Jen Gore or not.
Yep,
Um,
I've seen her on Pilma.
Very
Actually, sorry, not
successful
AJ.
practice in Atlanta, and she just accomplished a merger with Sweet James, um, which is a big national brand. And I would bet you, and 3 years ago, she never would have dreamed that would have happened. Um, but it did happen because an opportunity came along, and she's trucking along and doing her thing. I mean, she's relatively young. I mean, she's early 40s, if I'm remembering correctly. So it could happen. Um, but like I said, it would need to be the right fit. I was going to go back to my example of the woman I was talking about earlier that was 65 and had no employees. This would actually be an ideal scenario for her. Would be
Yes.
to merge her practice into another practice, because quite frankly, she doesn't have time to do option number one, which was to go find a successor and groom that successor. Her better option would be to merge her practice into a larger practice to be able to get some equity out of it, get a deal cut, because that could be done, under the right circumstances in a relatively short order. Um, and I suspect that this is actually the best option for a lot of lawyers out there who've kind of, quite frankly, waited to the last minute. Lawyers that are in their 60s looking, I need to get out. What do I do? I think this might be the best option for somebody that has such a short time frame that hasn't really done any pre-planning.
And I also think it'd be a good idea for the Gen course of the world, because if you structure it correctly, you essentially just stay on. Obviously, you can continue to practice, but she has a lot of business development, just natural opportunities, as well as just in her role anyway. And so it'd be a great way for her to go into a firm and just bring business and earn additional money
Right.
just through referrals.
Right. I think that's basically how Jen is set up. They've set her up as the business development rainmaker type. I'm not certain; they don't know what their exact deal is, but that's what it feels like, and that's her strike zone. She's great at that.
And one of the things, though, that I think this Victor Medina brought up in his presentation, one of our ADA cousins, I believe it was in his presentation, is that the challenge of this model is that you are limited by your buyers by three things about your buyer: the buyer's skills, the buyer's wallet, and the buyer's desire. So, Mark, why don't you talk a little bit more about why selling your law firm may just not be an option?
Well, there's several problems with out selling a law firm. Number one, your buyer pool is limited. We can only sell to other lawyers if you're in any state other than Arizona and Utah, and I'm not even sure about those states, but you have a limited buyer pool. It's not like if you have a restaurant or a muffler dealership or something like that you can literally sell to anybody. It's very limited. Usually you end up having to self-finance the sale because, to get the value out of the business, it's hard to get financing. Now, there is some available financing. Our friends in Indianapolis got an SBA loan when they wanted to buy into their partnership. And as a matter of fact, there's a podcast out there that I'll mention in the last segment the whole podcast discussed on how to get SBA loans to buy and sell practices. If I'm remembering correctly, though, there is a monetary limitation, and I want to say it was like $5 million was the most that you could borrow from the SBA to buy a practice. And there's a massive amount of hoops to go through. You have to basically sell your soul because the government is backing it. I know SBA loans are complicated because I got an SBA loan to buy this building, and given a choice, I would never, ever, ever do that again because it was a freaking nightmare. But it is an option. So the problem out there is that finding a buyer that has ready cash to actually pay cash for your firm is going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible to do. So you're going to have to self-finance. And that might work, very well could work. But the new owner is going to have to pay the note that they owe to you out of the funds of the business, out of the profits of the business. And if they don't know how to run the business, they're just going to run the business into the ground, and then they're going to default on the note. And you may have to come in and take the firm back over. This happened to a mutual friend of ours who had a law firm in South Carolina, I know, and he sold it when he wanted to get out. And within 2 years, he had to go take the firm back over again because the buyer didn't know what they were doing, defaulted on the note. Basically, he had to go in and pick up the pieces, and I'm sure he was not happy about that. So it's a problem in the sense that you have a limited pool of buyers, you have limited financing options, and you really need to pick carefully, because if you are going to, as I say, if you are going to tote the note, you got to make sure that they can keep the business running profitably.
And one of the things that common challenge between option one and option two, so option one being just promoting from within, and option two, the outright sale or merger or acquisition, is the valuation of the firm. What you think your law firm is worth may be vastly different from what someone is willing to pay for it. And I don't think that can be stated enough. Our poor Ada cousin that you met at last year's summit, who just thought that, she had, she probably, on paper, her financial statements probably told her she had a very valuable asset, but her ability to sell that to someone else would probably be a fraction, if that, of what she was able to sell it for. And so, when you're contemplating having people buy into your firm in option one, like have promoting from within and then having someone buy in equity, there are definitely a lot of experts out there. And another one of our Ada cousins spent, when he gave up, I guess, said someone purchase equity. They spent about 9 months to a year trying to figure out what that valuation is. They
Right.
each had their own counsel. They each had their own experts. And it was all very amicable, and it still took that long. So this is definitely not something that you sleep on or have to decide at the very end.
So I once got offered to buy somebody's practice, one of my friendly competitors, and he had heard the number bounced around that his firm should be worth 3 times its annual revenue. And he told me what that was. And I was like, there's absolutely no way in the world that I would pay him that much money for his practice, because I knew enough about his practice to know exactly what I said earlier. His practice was basically based off of referrals. He didn't have a marketing machine. He didn't have a client database that he consistently got business out of. Because it's not about past revenue. I could give a crap about what you made last year. What I want to know is what we can make next year and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that. And if you don't have something to transfer over that would justify that number, and it's really the most valuable thing that you have, is your ability to generate revenue in the future. So do you have a marketing machine? Do you have some sort of system of residual income? Do you have some magic bullet or something that makes sure that business keeps consistently coming in? That's what you're purchasing. You're purchasing the future. You're not purchasing the past. Past doesn't mean no good. So, but I've heard that. I've heard many people out there say 3 times your revenue. And I'm like, unless you can prove to me that you're going to be able to sustain that into the future and how you're going to do it without the owner involvement, I'm not buying it.
Yeah, as someone who I used to work oil and gas, as you know, Mark, and we did many acquisitions, and I looked at even many more companies before that we just decided not to purchase when I was in oil and gas, and it is never 3 times revenue. No, what about all your costs? Like, nobody ever looks at revenue, and I just don't know where you're hearing that or whoever's hearing that. But if you do, listeners, think that is what your firm is worth, good luck. Let us know if that's working for you, and just I'd be curious. But I think the third option, which is what Mark alluded to in our first segment, is just to
But I
really,
stepped on your outline. Sorry.
well, Mark, it wouldn't be a podcast if you didn't. So,
It
but
wouldn't
it's
be.
really to build your law firm and let it run without you. What our Ada cousin Victor Medina did call the perpetual law firm. So, Mark, talk us through a little bit more in depth than what we did in the first segment, what that really kind of means in practicality.
Well, okay. So I've said this a million times, but it's going back to killing the hero. I am the owner of the firm, but the firm does not depend upon my labor to generate revenue. Therefore, my job is simply to market and to manage the firm. Okay. Great. So I still have a job within the firm, but it's not revenue production. I have created profit centers within the firm, and the firm, whether I am here this month or not, the firm is going to continue to create revenue. Now, I can further kill the hero by removing myself from even the marketing and the management function. We're doing that right now. We are looking for a new marketing director. quite frankly, I act as the marketing director within the firm. I am, again, looking to relieve myself from one of those key responsibilities within the firm. And as I move on, at some point, there will be a point where I pretty much don't have any responsibilities within the firm, that every responsibility is covered by somebody else. And I am simply the de facto chairman of the board of the firm. I own the firm just like I would own stock in Apple or IBM or some oil and gas company out there, which I don't know anything about. I just become the owner, and I have, I still have control. I still have control over basically who are my top level people within the firm, and they still have to answer to me and tell me what's going on, but I don't have any direct responsibility. And I can do that till the day I drop, till 110. I could own the law firm until I'm 100, drop dead at 110. That
I
doesn't
think
mean I
that
shouldn't have a succession plan that somebody will own it after me, so it continues. But I think that's the point that Victor was trying to make, is if you can build a law firm like that doesn't rely on you, you can sort of solve this succession problem, at least to the extent until you drop dead.
Yeah, but I think that I think that that was my takeaway from Victor Medina's presentation, was to run a law firm like a business, not like a law firm. I mean, we're all accidental. Well, our listeners, I think, are mostly accidental law firm owners. And so you want to do everything that we talk about on this podcast, really, to avoid, what is our tagline, Mark? To avoid making your law firm a prison. You want to implement the systems, invest in technology, invest in your people, build a great culture that allows you to keep your people in your law firm. Because if your law firm revolves around you, that's obviously not a great way for succession planning. The benefits of this, Mark, obviously, and the way that we think about it, with all the things that we've just talked about, you can take draws from this or draws or deferred compensation, however you want to do this. It'll literally allows you to, like you mentioned, when you own stock, you can take quote unquote dividends. You can find a way to do that for the rest of your life. And so it's literally financing your lifestyle until whatever happens. And I think, just like when we talked about with in our first segment of the first option, where your caseload decreases as potentially the marketing and management increases from somebody that you're promoting from within. In that same way, your day-to-day responsibilities, call it from, Mark, how old are you again? What did we say? 78. You have 20 years. So from 78 to, call it 110, those day-to-day responsibilities was also ebb and shift to how much ever you wanted them to. Mm-hmm. And I loved the idea from, I believe, was it Ed, another one of our Attica cousins a couple of years ago at Attica Summit, was to build a board of directors, which is I definitely had a board of directors when I worked for when I worked in oil and gas. And I loved the idea of bringing that concept into the legal world, where you do have a kind of an oversight committee, whether that be of family members, because this is their legacy. This is theirs as much as well as yours. And so I think that we need to think about things as a legacy, not an exit.
Exactly.
So, Mark, I think in our final segment, you're going to share, what is it again?
Marc's 5 action items.
Perfect.
This is Marc Whitehead, lawyer, entrepreneur, and business coach. Thanks for listening to the Successful Barrister podcast. If we've stirred your juices, hit me up with an email at marc@marcwhitehead.com. Remember, Marc is spelled with a C. And get on the Successful Barrister newsletter mailing list. Even better, let's set up a call. I'd love to talk to you about working together, talk shop, or just shooting the breeze.
And we're back. All right, so we're going to wrap up with Marc's 5 action items with relating to law firm structure, law firm succession, what we've been talking about here today. So the first thing that I see, and I still see this, it just amazes me, um, how many people are out there that are not correctly structured in a legal sense, and in other words, haven't correctly structured their law firm. They're still operating as a sole proprietorship or as a general partnership, where it's a general partnership with no partnership agreement, nothing in writing. I'm like, oh my God, how, even me who likes to live on a wing and a prayer, I couldn't sleep at night without some form of structure. And the problem is you're getting screwed by the tax man if you're in one of those, if you're not structured properly. So, I'll lay out what we have. Now, this is unique to Texas, and I understand this does not work in every state, but, our law firm is structured as a limited liability partnership, which I think may be slightly unique to Texas law. Most states call them limited partnerships, but in Texas we have not the LP, but the LLP as an option. And so I'm basically the limited partner in conjunction with the general partner, which is my management corporation. So it's a unique structure, but it's a tax efficient structure. But there's other ways to do it. There's PCs, there's LPs, there's LLCs. I'm not going to get into all the ways, but you need to consult with a good business lawyer and figure out what in your state works for you, from both a management structure, from a structure that can limit your liability as best you can, and from a structure that will limit your taxes as best you can. This is my number one takeaway. Now, I would bet half of our listening audience out there does not have such a structure. Half do. So for the half that do, you can, I understand. You may think this is very elementary, but there's so many people out there who do not have, a tax efficient structure. It still amazes me. The second one, and this is where I fall off, I will admit, have a good estate plan. I have an estate plan. It was drafted almost 25 years ago. Little bit out of date.
A little bit.
A little bit out of date. As a matter of fact, I have an appointment with an estate planning lawyer at the end of August. So if I can make it till the end of August, I am going to remedy this situation. But back when I did this it probably wasn't 20. It's probably more like 20 years ago, maybe something like that. I do think I had 2 kids at the time. I'm in a different situation now. My kids are adults, but now I have a law firm, a law firm that has 75 employees and multi-million dollars in revenue, and, that's in this LLP structure, and my estate plan probably doesn't deal with that very well. So in order to protect my family, quite frankly, to protect you guys, my employees, we're going to restructure this plan in such a way that allows for, if I get hit by a bus, that this law firm will continue to run and will continue to operate until, the appropriate ownership can come along and take over it. So it becomes a continuing entity. Because quite frankly, it's more valuable to my family as an ongoing entity, as opposed to if it just got broken up. That would be not the best way to get the value out of the firm for my family. You can jump in anytime here. This is my list.
No, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I think that what we talked about in the second segment about a limited buyer option, you don't even, I don't know, that's one of our niches, right? We don't know another law firm that does all that we do. And that is our competitive advantage. And so you have very limited buyers.
Go call Ashley Marks. That's the first thing I want you to do if I get hit by a bus. Call
Ashley. I'll call Ashley.
Call Ashley. So the third, and you're very involved in this one, which is an emergency plan.
Okay.
So tell us about the emergency plan that we
I know that Mrs. Whitehead was very adamant that I signed some powers of attorney. Is that the emergency plan we're speaking
Well,
of?
so yeah, so that's part one. So you have power of attorney. So think about it, we're a disability firm. We see this happen every day. People who, are thinking that they still should be working, and all of a sudden they get struck down by something, a stroke, a heart attack, an accident, whatever, and all of a sudden they can't function any longer. But they're still alive. They're still there. Um, so it's more likely that I become disabled before I pass away.
Well, I think this,
Statistically
yeah.
speaking.
Yep, I think that the more likely scenario that you posited to me was just, we've got a 6 week window, or maybe we've got a 6 to 8 week window where the doctors are very hopeful and optimistic that things are going to be better in 8 weeks. But what's going to happen in 8 weeks? Could I literally go? Could I request a line of credit from the bank? Could I?
Right.
What are my options? Can I renew a lease on this? All the things. Can I move the money to where it needed to be to continue that this is an ongoing entity for 8 weeks? And I
So
think
the
that Tina
emergency
was
plan begins with the power of attorney that I have granted you. Now, it's a contingent power of attorney that kicks in upon my disability, and there are certain parameters of what constitutes a disability, and it's defined. Um, Everybody knows about it, at least the people who need to know. My family knows
well, and
about
now
it.
all our listeners.
Now, well, yeah, everybody knows about it. So if I stroke out, Diana has power of attorney to continue the operation of the firm. Now, in conjunction with that, we have a detailed contingency plan. And the first thing in the contingency plan is if Marc is disabled, we have it basically in three pieces. The first one is if Marc is disabled, but it looks like he might come back over time. Let's say that I have to rehab, from some set. I'm just using stroke as the example. If I have to rehab from some stroke for the next 6 months, but it looks like I might be able to come back. There are certain contingencies. The number one is you have a list of expenses that you are to go cut. In other words, to preserve cash, to make sure that we don't become cash poor. So we cut a lot of the things that are not absolutely necessary. So there's a whole itemized list of what those things are. Second to that is number one, where are all the passcodes?
Yes. Yeah.
Very important. Need to know where that stuff is. Where are all the bank accounts? Who are all the key players? Where are all the insurance policies? All of the things that you need to be able to continue to operate the business, to make sure payroll is met, to make sure all the key vendors are still in effect. I also have a list of things that you do not cut, like absolutely pay our web vendors because that's our biggest asset. Absolutely keep paying, the rent, keep paying there are certain things that have to be paid, keep paying the health insurance, all that fun stuff. But there's a specific emergency plan set up for if I become disabled, but it looks like I might come back. Then there's a slight variation on it if I become disabled and it looks like I'm not coming back. And at that point, then there's some instructions on how to start, basically trying to find a successor owner, trying to sell the practice, but basically selling the practice as a whole, not by breaking the practice up, because I believe it has more value that way. Then, of course, there's the last part is if I just die, here's instructions if I die. But it's important to have this emergency plan and to have somebody that is familiar with the plan and has the power of attorney to execute on that plan. And ideally, in a law firm, it should be another lawyer. If I gave this power of attorney to my wife, she's a non-lawyer. She doesn't have really the authority to run the firm as a non-lawyer. That would be number 3 on the list. You're thrilled. I can tell you're thrilled by having that power of attorney.
Still not. But Tina, Mrs. Whitehead had, she looked me in the eye and she said, "This is for me, not him, right?" And I had nothing to say to that. I had absolutely nothing to say. It was a point very well made, Mrs. Whitehead.
Fourth tip, fourth action item. Start thinking about grooming a successor. Look at your firm, start thinking about it. If it's not a successor, start thinking about a merger partner, but just start thinking about it. At a minimum, start thinking about who should have power of attorney to run your practice should you become disabled. Because again, I've seen so many people out there who, in their 50s and 60s, they have health events and they're out for 3, 4, 5, 6 months or longer, and if you want to have something to come back to, you want to still have a viable practice that's not in shambles. If you can come back to it, if that's your goal. So you got to have somebody out there that's your backup. Fifth tip, and here's the good one. I'm giving you a resource. My friend Ed Alexander. Ed is an attorney out of Florida. Number one, he has a podcast, a great podcast called Law Deals, Succession Planning, Partnerships, Purchases, and Sales. So this is what his business is. This is what his law practice is he advises law firms on business structures, on succession planning. He represents people on the buying and selling of practices, on helping you figure out how to value the practice, how to get an appraisal on your practice. This is his whole deal. Now, he's out of Florida, so he can only practice law in Florida, but he does consult and advise in all 50 states. So, if you consult with him and it requires legal work, he will help you find somebody locally. But he's the best person I know that can help advise you on all of these issues, whether you want to get into a partnership agreement, whether you want to do a merger, whether you want to do a sell, whether you just want to look at making your business tax efficient and structured correctly. And if nothing else, he just has a good podcast, and he has a lot of good guests on it, talking about all things financial related to the running of a law firm. So Ed Alexander, Law Deals, that's the podcast. So can't recommend him enough. Another Atticus buddy of ours, Atticus. So those are my 5 tips, my 5 action items. What are yours?
I don't know that I understand the new segment, but you know what? Here's my takeaway. Can I just do a takeaway?
Yeah.
My takeaway, and especially preparing this outline that you did not use, is that succession planning is not retirement planning. And I think that that's the mindset shift that all law firm owners have to kind of get to. We're not talking about you guys retiring, at least not the way that Marc's going to do it and the way that we think it should be done, maybe with the whole idea of a perpetual law firm. No one's asking you to retire. We're just evolving into a new role, potentially a new structure as a board of directors. But succession planning, it's not retirement planning. So I think that because obviously, well, not obviously, some people have that mind block on retirement. I think Marc does. I'm not speaking
Well,
to
that's my
Marc.
problem is I don't want to retire because
Yeah.
I wouldn't know what to do.
Oh, well, I know that one was a very not so subtle jab at you, sir.
Oh, I know. I get into this with my wife all the time,
She did not
and
ask me to do this podcast for
right.
you, but I do think that that is one thing that we just, if I would say to anybody who's struggling with the succession planning, is not retirement planning. And once you've wrapped your mind around that, then come back and listen to us again. And maybe the 3 structures or 3 options will hit a little differently.
Okay. All right. With that, I'm getting the high sign that we are out of time. So first, if you want to discuss this anymore, give me a shout, send me an email, marc@marcwhitehead.com. Marc is spelled with a C. So remember to rate and review us wherever you get your podcast. And if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit the forward button and forward this. I know you can hit the forward button on your phone. You're all listening on your iPhones. Hit the forward button and text it to your friends. And be sure to visit us at our website, successfulbarrister.com. And be sure to visit our sponsor, Marc Whitehead Associates, a national disability law firm at disabilitydenials.com. And with that, we're out of here.
Bye.